Yeah, man. So today, man, we're gonna do a reenact, man. We ain't gave y'all nothing in a minute, man. I've been under the weather a little bit, but we back with it, man. And this is the man that made a change in Black America during these times of segregation here in this place we call America, man. So we're gonna dig into this, man, and y'all already know what to do, man. So check us out. 1955. The Ku Klux Klan has just 1955. The Ku Klux Klan has just finished their rally, and now they're doing what they've always done, riding through black neighborhoods to terrorize families who've lived here for generations. The local police look the other way, while the government pretends it isn't happening. This was just another night in the segregated South, where wearing a white hood meant you could get away with murder. Yeah. But in Monroe, something different was about to happen. Something that would shake the very foundation of how Black Americans fought for their rights. You see, while Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was preaching nonviolence in Alabama, one man in Monroe looked at those burning crosses, those night riders terrorizing his community, and decided enough was enough. His name was Robert F. Williams, and his story isn't your... So yeah, that's what we're going to be talking about today. Robert F. Williams from Monroe, man. And, he was in the military when he came back home from all of this after being all over the world, seeing that, that he was treated like a hero. Then when he get here, he get treated like a zero. It was like, a culture shock to this man. So dig into this, man. Damn that. Dig this. Hit the subscribe button. Run, run, run. Tell a friend, mama, grandpa, grandma, uncle, sister, brother. There go that man again. Let's go. Typical civil rights tale. Robert was a Marine veteran who came home, looked at the terror in his community, and did something that nobody thought was possible at the time. He armed his people. He organized 60 men, trained them for self-defense, and famously stated, "Nowhere in the annals of history does the record show a people delivered from bondage by patience alone." Considered a hero to many, Robert's story all started with a simple question. What happens when the oppressed refuse to be victims of the system? Robert Franklin Williams was born on February 26, 1925, in a world shaped by the shadows of slavery. His grandparents, who had lived under the whip and chain, made sure he never forgot what that meant for him. Growing up in Monroe, their stories were filled with warnings about what could happen if Black people couldn't defend themselves. Robert witnessed this truth firsthand at age 11. When he saw a police officer brutally beat a Black woman on Monroe's main street, the officer dragged her bleeding body along the pavement to jail, leaving a trail of blood as her screams echoed across the street. It was a public spectacle meant to remind the Black community of their vulnerability and inferiority. That image would be burned in young... Okay, man, before we get on with this, man, I want to start with parental discussion is a vibe doing this reenact right here, man. It's just a documentary in the reenact of how I used to be in the days of way back being Black here in America. And after you have so much power for so long and been this way for so long in history and generations and generations have been taught this same privilege that you have over other individuals, then do you think that it would just stop today just because somebody said look the other way? Robert's mind forever. But Monroe in the 1930s wasn't much different from the world his grandparents knew. It may have been 70 years since the end of slavery, but the heavy chains of oppression weighed heavy in the air. It was still a prison for Black people, just with different chains. White-only signs were plastered across town. Back... You see that type of stuff right there? See? Colors weight room. Privacy property, no parking. So it's private property, it's private parking, and colors must wait. Okay? So you mean that you needed to be told when and where and how and what to do before you even be able to be um, allowed to do whatever that is what you was trying to do. Dig that. Doors and separate entrances for colored folks. Every sip from a segregated water fountain, every step off the sidewalk when whites passed by. These were the daily humiliations and reminders of a system designed to keep Black Americans in their place. But then came World War II, and like many young Black men in the South, Robert saw an opportunity to better his life up north. Detroit, the arsenal of democracy, a city.
See, that was the Motor City. That's why I tell young brothers and sisters, you know what I mean, that the GMC Motors was built by the people that was descendants of slaves, and in 1945 they didn't even build no cars no more. They took all these manufacturing factories and stuff like that, all the workers for them, and they had them to do like they have you guys do at Apple Computer. Assembly line, this piece goes to here and this here. You don't know what you're building or what you're making, but at the same time, though, you're doing the production that they need to process the things that they are making. So, yeah, that's what they decided to do after they had all these people rush to Motor City for a better life, which was in, Detroit, Pontiac, and places like that is where they all came from. So I drive GMC and I don't mess with Ford because Ford was built for the American people, not for the unworthy American people. Or should I say the people that are not treated as Americans, but they're here in America.
You could make real money working in the auto factories. But what he found there wasn't just a job, it was an education in resistance. 1943. The ongoing war had created fierce labor competition between white and Black Americans, both struggling to find ways to feed and support their families. Black workers had migrated north by the thousands, drawn by the promise of defense plant jobs, but Detroit wasn't ready. Housing was scarce, and Black families were crammed into small, overcrowded neighborhoods. White workers became fearful of the competition, so they staged walkouts when Black employees were promoted. In June of that year, white workers at Packard Plant, an automobile manufacturer in Detroit, shut down the entire production line to protest working alongside African Americans. Wow, these guys were serious about their racism. Detroit had quickly become a powder keg of racial tension. And when the spark finally lit, the city exploded into chaos. For 5 horrifying days, violence raged through the streets. Robert found himself caught in the middle of it all, watching as Black residents fought back against white mob violence in a desperate attempt to save themselves. 34 people died in those riots. 25 of them were Black. But something else was born in that fire. You see, an elephant raised into adulthood while chained to a chair will think that it cannot break free from its bondage. But we all know, mighty is the elephant. The scales had fallen from his eyes, and Robert realized that submission wasn't the only option. He could fight. Like many young Black men of his generation, Robert was drafted into military service in 1944, but his experience would be different. He was assigned to
for that war that went from, I want to say, from the early 40s to 1946. And they didn't build any automobiles or anything of that sort. You would never find a car that was a 1945. You would never even hear one being built in 1945. He was a Marine.
Marines, a branch that had only recently begun accepting African Americans. For a year and a half, Robert served as a private in the segregated Marines. This wasn't just military service. It was a reminder of the contradictions of fighting for democracy abroad while facing segregation in uniform. The discipline, tactical training, and organizational skills he learned in the Marines wouldn't go to waste. After the war ended and he returned home to Monroe, these same military experiences would shape his approach to defending his community. Robert wasn't alone. He was part of a generation of Black veterans who returned home with the new skills and a deeper determination to fight for their rights. They had defended America abroad. Now they would defend their communities at home. But when Robert returned to Monroe in 1955, he found a town frozen in time. The same white-only signs, the same daily humiliations, the same terror from the Klan, except now, he was seeing it through different eyes. The eyes of a trained Marine who understood the power of violence, and he wasn't alone. In 1947, young Robert had married Mabel Robinson, just 16 years old, but already a fierce advocate for civil rights. Despite her youth, Mabel had already seen enough injustice to last a lifetime. She grew up watching her own community.
These are the people that they leave out of the civil rights movement. These are the people that they want to be forgotten about that stood up for the rights of you and I. These are the people that they would like to forget, just like the position that you and I are playing in this uh, democracy of racism that they have here in America by just speaking out on it or even acknowledging anyone to know that it is there and it should not be forgotten and it should have been taken care of and it should not spill over to influence uh to influence and to uh not be understood by the people that went through it that have the same skin complexion that you and I have, and they will always have that grudge look upon people with the same skin complexion of you and I because of the skin complexion that they have and the forefather that they had. It is embedded inside of them to feel and to act and to show that they are and they want to be the superior of all humanity.
Struggle against segregation, and unlike many young women of her era, she refused to accept it quietly. While most civil rights couples preached nonviolence, Robert and Mabel Williams believed in something else entirely: the right of armed self-defense. People like Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott King, who became the faces of peaceful resistance, led dozens of nonviolent demonstrations across the South. Robert Williams had seen way too much to put their faiths in passive resistance alone. But how would this Marine veteran and his young wife transform from peaceful citizens into militant leaders of their community? And what would happen when their radical ideas clashed with the nonviolent mainstream of the civil rights movement? You need to understand what the NAACP was supposed to be. Founded in 1909, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People emerged in response to the lynchings and racial violence sweeping America.
Now, why would any man be able to hang another man and it's just constitutional? You see these guys standing around looking at this dude. Now, what did this dude do, or what could he have done to deserve to get hung and done the way that these men done this man and erase it out of history like it never happened? Like that wouldn't affect you. That you know that these four individuals or four individuals that look like these individuals could do this to you because you are an individual of this man that's hanging in this tree. Like that.
It was created by black and white progressives alike, aiming to fight discrimination through the courts and legislature. Their weapon of choice, however, were lawyers, not guns. Respectability, not resistance. When Robert Williams returned home to Monroe after his time in Detroit and the Marines, he found a town frozen in time. With a population of just 12,000, Monroe had become a stronghold of white supremacy, home to an estimated 7,500 Klan members. Yes, you heard that right. Over half of the town's population were Klan members. Meanwhile, the local NAACP chapter was barely breathing. Like chapters across the country, they followed the national organization's preferred model, focusing on middle-class professionals like doctors, lawyers, and ministers. The kind of black folks who wouldn't scare racist white people. The kind who fought with briefs and motions. But Robert saw things differently. When he joined the Monroe NAACP chapter in 1955 and became its president the following year, he brought with him a radical new vision. The people who needed the NAACP most weren't in courtrooms or country clubs. He went to the textile mills where black workers endured daily humiliation for poverty wages. He went to the farms where families still worked land their grandparents had sharecropped. And most importantly, he went to the veterans, men who, like him, had fought fascism abroad, only to face it again at home. The results were transformative. Under Robert's leadership, membership expanded dramatically as working men and women with calloused hands and battle-hardened spirits joined the fight for their rights. And the first target was the public library, a taxpayer-funded institution that had shut its doors to black citizens.
Yeah.
This wasn't just about books. It was about the fundamental right to access public resources that Black taxpayers helped fund.
Yes.
The campaign succeeded. The library's doors were finally opened to all citizens of Monroe, regardless of color. It was a small victory, but a significant one, proving that organized resistance.
That was a big one because the simple fact is now you have the access to go to these places. If you can read and comprehend, you can get the information that you need to make a better way and a better day for you and yours and people of your ethnical background.
Could crack the foundations of segregation, but as Robert and his followers would soon learn, some victories come with a violent backlash. Robert led the fight to integrate Monroe's public swimming pool. The math was simple. Black taxpayers had helped pay for that pool, but their children couldn't swim in it. How absurd was that? Following the NAACP's traditional playbook, they started with peaceful demonstrations. NAACP members formed picket lines around the pool. But what happened next would change everything. The protesters were met with a hail of gunfire. White mobs opened fire on the picket lines, and despite law enforcement officers being present, not a single arrest was made. The message was clear. The law would not protect them.
Nothing ever happened like this in American history to no other ethnical background race but the African American, the Black man, the American African, or whatever that you wanted to label it to be. So by you knowing that and seeing that and can prove that, because history tells time and time tells history, then why would you think that any of us will ever believe that we will ever see any retribution? We are not of your race, and you do not respect us as being a human being, and you state this in the Constitution. So why should we ever believe that you would ever have any type of law that protects us? If you are in the rainbow, the rainbow colored sexual preferences, then you are protected by law for no one to discriminate against you. But if you are an African American, then they can discriminate you, and it is not a hate or a racial crime. And it's like unbelievable to see that people that came after this situation would get their retributions and their rights and their laws passed behind them to protect them for whatever things that they choose to be, but none for the people who went through these things and worse things than they ever went through or ever will go through, still don't get their retribution.
No need to take the white taxes to the courts because they will be free, and that the federal government is not coming to the aid of people who are oppressed, and it is time for Negro men to stand up.
For Robert, this was the final straw. The swimming pool violence proved what he had long suspected, that legal briefs and peaceful protests alone wouldn't be enough in a town where the Klan operated with impunity. That's when Robert did something unprecedented. Drawing on his military experience and connections, he reached out to other Black veterans who understood both discipline and duty. These were men who had fought fascism in Europe and the Pacific, only to find it alive and well in their hometown. They trained in military tactics, they fortified their homes, and they made it crystal clear. Any Klan attack would be met with equal force. This came to a head in the summer of 1957 when rumors spread that the Klan planned to attack Dr. A. Elbert Perry, the NAACP's vice president. The Black Armed Guard fortified his house with sandbags. When the Klan opened fire from their cars, Robert's men returned fire, driving them away. The shooting made headlines, but the real story was what happened next. The same city officials who had always defended the Klan's constitutional right to organize suddenly changed their tune. Within days, they called an emergency session and passed a city ordinance that banned the Klan from Monroe without special permission from the police chief. For the Black community of Monroe, this was a turning point. Robert himself explained it best in his book, Negroes with Guns. Racists consider themselves superior beings and are not willing to exchange their superior lives for our inferior ones. They are most vicious and violent when they can practice violence with impunity. The ordinance requiring Klan gatherings to get police permission marked the first time the local government had ever restricted Klan activities in Monroe. The message was clear. Organized armed resistance had achieved what decades of peaceful petitions could not. But this success came at a price. The incident drew the attention of not just local authorities, but the FBI. Robert's insurance company canceled his car.
Now you see how they play dirty.
By 1959, Robert's confrontational approach had put him on a collision course with the NAACP's national leadership when he publicly responded to a Monroe court's decision to acquit 2 white men of raping a pregnant black woman. His words would ignite a firestorm. Standing on the courthouse steps, Robert declared that if the courts wouldn't protect black citizens, they would have to protect themselves. The NAACP leadership, committed to their nonviolent approach, suspended him from his position. But Robert wasn't done. If anything, the split from the NAACP freed him to pursue even more militant strategies. Through 1960 and early 1961, the tensions in Monroe continued to simmer. By 1961, the law was clear, at least on paper. White police authorities were already working to frame Robert's protection of the Stegals as a kidnapping. Despite the fact that the couple never reported any abduction after leaving his house, the propaganda was already being made. Within hours, the situation had transformed. This wasn't just another confrontation with local authorities. The FBI issued a warrant in Charlotte, charging Robert with kidnapping, despite the fact that the Stegals never reported any abduction after leaving his house. Facing false kidnapping charges and the very real threat of violence, Robert and his wife Mabel were forced to make an impossible decision. They fled Monroe, beginning a journey that would take them first to Cuba by way of Canada and Mexico. But exile didn't silence Robert. It amplified his voice. In Cuba, with Fidel Castro's approval and government assistance, he established Radio Free Dixie in 1962. This groundbreaking program, which aired in the US and Canada, combined jazz and blues with sharp commentary on the American government. That same year, Robert published his seminal work, Negroes with Guns. The book detailed his experiences with violent racism and laid out his fundamental disagreement with the nonviolent wing of the civil rights movement. His words would later profoundly influence Huey P. Newton, founder of the Black Panther Party. After 5 years in Cuba.
So you see the inspiration that came from this man was the inspiration that struck the inspiration of the Black Panthers.
But Robert's journey continued. He traveled throughout Asia and Africa, speaking out against racism, colonialism, and the Vietnam War. In Vietnam, he even met with revolutionary leader Ho Chi Minh. From 1966 to 1969, Robert and his family lived in China, where he continued to publish his newsletter, The Crusader. His presence there deepened the connection between the Communist Party of China and the African American revolutionary movement. In a historic moment, he received the honor of meeting with Mao Zedong, who issued statements supporting the African American struggle against discrimination. By late 1969, Robert and Mabel returned to the United States, settling in Michigan. The kidnapping charges still loomed, but Michigan's Governor William G. Milliken refused to honor North Carolina's extradition request, noting that Robert couldn't receive a fair trial there. The legal shadow wouldn't lift until 1975, when Robert was finally able to face the charges. In January 1976, nearly 15 years after he fled Monroe, North Carolina prosecutors dismissed all charges against him, acknowledging their main witness was too weak to appear in court. Robert's story wasn't just about one man's fight for justice. It was about challenging the very framework of how civil rights could be won. At a time when nonviolence was considered the only acceptable path, he dared to argue for the fundamental right of self-defense. At his funeral, Rosa Parks delivered the eulogy, praising him for his courage and for his commitment to freedom. Her words captured what many had come to understand, that Robert F. Williams had forced America to confront difficult questions about resistance, self-defense, and the true meaning of civil rights. While Dr. King preached turning the other cheek, Robert showed there was another way. Not better, not worse, just different. A Marine veteran who understood that sometimes the only language oppressors understand is the language of force. He proved that armed resistance wasn't just about guns, it was about dignity, about standing up straight in a world trying to keep you on your knees. If you want to learn more about freedom fighters who stood up for Black justice, check out our video on Fred Hampton, the Black Messiah.
See, these guys here are guys who were before Huey P. and Bobby Seale and Edgar Cleaver and Bunchy Carter and Angela Davis and George and Jonathan Jackson and so many other more. Okay, so this is the United Ghettos of America with the 3 Ks, and we're here today with the uplifting of Black people and the motivation of Black people and the motivation of dignity and the motivation of a segregated culture of people that fought to be and to get in position to be where they are now and still have many more battles to fight. So hit the subscribe buttons, and if you want to learn more, check out the Fred Hamilton. And that's it for us, and we out of here. This is the UG of A. Peace.